Hi everyone. So today we're going to go through the Bernoulli Principle and talk about how it can create a lift force or a down force. And with any Bernoulli Principle question, you always want to mention the term aerofoil shape. And this is a really exaggerated version of one. But an aerofoil shape is any shape where the airflow over one side of it is more curved compared to the other side. So this is really exaggerated. One side doesn't have to be completely curved and the other side completely flat. But this is just so to get the point across that an aerofoil shape is where on one side of the object, the air is traveling in a more curved manner, whereas on the other side, it's not traveling in as much of a curve. And on the curved side, air is forced to travel a greater distance, and you can think of both streams of air as having to meet at the same point at the same time. So if this air is having to travel a greater distance, it's therefore going to have to travel at a faster velocity to get there. And when air travels at a faster velocity, the air particles become more spread apart. Bit like cars on a motorway. If the cars are traveling quicker, there's more space in between each car. Whereas if there's a traffic jam and cars are traveling slower, they're a lot closer together. And it's the same with air. So because this air underneath doesn't have as great a distance to travel, it's traveling at a slower velocity, and therefore the air particles are a lot closer together. And because the air particles are closer together, if you were to take a cross section of this here, you can see that there's more air particles in that space. So that creates a high pressure, whereas there's less air particles here. So that creates a low pressure. So what we're saying there is that when air has less distance to travel, it travels at a slower velocity, but a higher pressure. And then when air has more distance to travel, it travels at a faster velocity, but at a lower pressure. So whatever you say about the velocity of the air, you say the opposite about the pressure. So Bernoulli's principle is all about creating this pressure gradient of high to low pressure. And then the other thing is that in sport, most of the time, you don't have shapes that have a curved side and a flat side. So something like a discus has equal curvature on both sides. So to create the aerofoil shape in the first place, what they'd want you to mention is an angle of attack. So the angle of attack is less than 40 degrees. And when you release something with that angle of attack, that then creates the aerofoil shape. So always mention that at the start of a Bernoulli principle question, that in order to create the aerofoil shape, you use this optimal angle of attack that you release the object into the air at. So let's talk about Bernoulli's principle in regards to a discus. So discus has equal curvature on both sides. So if you threw it flat, there wouldn't be a difference in the distance that the air has to travel on both sides. So to make sure that there is, you use this optimal angle of attack of less than 40 degrees, and that creates this aerofoil shape. And then the air being forced over the top of the discus has to travel a greater distance. So it has to travel at a faster velocity, and therefore it's traveling at a lower pressure because the air particles are further apart. Whereas the air being channeled underneath the discus is traveling less distance, so it doesn't have to travel as quickly, so it travels at a slower velocity, but at a higher pressure because the air particles are a lot closer together now. So what that means is you end up with this high pressure airflow underneath the discus and this low pressure airflow above it. And you'd say that that creates a pressure gradient. And because air always travels from high to low pressure, that creates a lift force on the discus. So that high pressure is carrying the discus upwards into the low pressure and just allowing it to stay in the air for longer. So that's Bernoulli's principle in the context of a lift force, and this you'd apply it the exact same way to like a ski jumper or a javelin or anything like that. But they could ask you about Bernoulli's principle in relation to downforce. Now, nothing really changes here. The principle is the same. It's just that the aerofoil shape has been flipped upside down. So this time you end up with the flatter air traveling over the top of the shape, and then the curved air being channeled underneath the shape or the object. And therefore, this time, the air travelling underneath the object is travelling a greater distance at a faster velocity, but a lower pressure. And then the air travelling above the shape is travelling less distance, therefore at a slower velocity and a higher pressure. So you've got the high pressure above and the low pressure below this time, and that creates a downforce. So this is the reason why F1 cars have spoilers, because you've got a load of air travelling over the top of this aerofoil shape, which is travelling less distance, so slower velocity, but a higher pressure. And then you've got all this air that's being channeled underneath the spoiler that is travelling a greater distance, so a faster velocity and a lower pressure. And therefore, this time you've got the pressure gradient with the high pressure above forcing down on the car. So it's creating this downforce on the car. And the reason why that's good is it increases the friction between the tyre and the tarmac so that the car can accelerate quicker. So overall there, with a Bernoulli's Principle question, always make sure that you mention that there's an aerofoil shape which is created by an angle of attack. And then it's always that the air travelling in the more curved manner travels a greater distance at a faster velocity because it's got more distance to cover at a lower pressure, because the quicker the air is flowing, the more the air particles spread out. So let's apply it to, firstly, a question from OCR. So they're asking about a ski jumper here. So automatically I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be a lift force because the ski jumper wants to remain in the air. So here you've got the air being channeled over the top of the ski jumper and then air being channeled underneath. So there would have been this optimal angle of attack when they leave the ground of below 40 degrees, and that's created the aerofoil shape. And then the air travelling over the top of the ski jumper is travelling a greater distance at a faster velocity and a lower pressure. And then the air travelling underneath the ski jumper is travelling less distance, so a slower velocity, but at a higher pressure. That creates a pressure gradient, and that high pressure creates this lift force. It's lifting the ski jumper upwards. So let's see how that answer compares to the mark scheme for question 5. So the ski jumper adopts an aerofoil shape, and that has been created by an angle of attack of less than 40 degrees. The air travels further over the top. It therefore travels faster over the top at a lower pressure over the top of the ski jumper. Air always moves from high to low pressure, and that creates a lift force. So we've got all those marks there. If we then have a look at a question from AQA, but this time on about a cyclist. So now I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be a downforce question. If we just draw it onto the cyclist first, so you can visualize this, you've got flatter air traveling over the top of them, and then you've got air being channeled underneath the bike. So the air being channeled underneath is traveling a greater distance at a faster velocity and a lower pressure, whereas the air above is traveling less distance, so it's traveling at a slower velocity but a higher pressure. So this time you've got high pressure above, low pressure below, and that creates a downforce on the cyclist. And that is good because that will then increase the amount of friction between the wheel and the track so they can generate more speed. So let's have a look at that question. Describe a cyclist's use of the Bernoulli effect to increase his speed. Let's see how the answer compares to the mark scheme. So firstly, the body forms an aerofoil shape, so always throw that phrase in. Air travels further under the cyclist, so it travels faster under the cyclist at a lower pressure under the cyclist. Air always travels from high to low pressure, and this time it creates a downforce. So that's the Bernoulli principle all done. So always remember, angle of attack creates the aerofoil shape, and then just talk about the distance the velocity and the pressure of the air on both sides, and that it creates a pressure gradient, and finish your answer with either lift force or downforce. I hope you guys found that tutorial useful. As always, if there's any other topics you want me to run through, drop them in the comments. And if you do want any more personalized one-to-one support with either coursework or the exams, feel free to click the link in the description and it'll take you to my website